Hi, Matt.
Hey, how are you?
We're seeing some pretty startling images, I'd say, coming out of Gaza right now. This ground offensive has began, and the takeover, it seems, of Gaza City. 60,000 reservists have been called up for the Israeli military. Walk me through what we know so far about this ground operation.
We've been hearing, and Gazan people in Gaza City have been hearing for the past several days or weeks, evacuation orders asking them to leave Gaza City. Because remember, this whole operation was telegraphed several weeks ago, and it is really just starting now after weeks and weeks of maneuvers by the IDF around Gaza City. From what I heard from the Israeli military this morning, they already have boots on the ground, as it were, inside Gaza City, soldiers who are operating there. And they said that 350,000 people inside that area that they've identified as the focus point of this incursion have already fled. But that means that there are still hundreds of thousands who are left. That is a big, big problem. And it's not only those civilians who are left, who are in the line of fire now. And we know it's also, according to some sources within the Israeli military, about 20 hostages are thought to still be in the Gaza City area. And that is a particular concern to Israelis and the family members of those hostages who believe and are saying that this ground operation is just going to prolong the war and that it will put their loved ones' lives at risk.
So I want to talk about the two different groups of people that are currently under siege. And first is the Palestinians, right? As you mentioned, hundreds of thousands have left Gaza City, but hundreds of thousands are left. Unable to leave. What happens to those people? What is the plan for those individuals, according to the IDF or Netanyahu's government with this siege?
This is one of the things that we heard from Eyal Zamir, who is the military chief of staff. And this was not public, but this was written up in Israeli media. And he complained, and has been complaining for the past several weeks, openly in these closed-door meetings, that there is no end game to this. There is no day after. And you see this in places like Lebanon or Iran, where we're seeing a military dominance by the Israelis, but without a political or diplomatic solution that would eventually move to end these crises. Now, the situation with Lebanon and Israel ended with a ceasefire, with Iran and Israel ended with a ceasefire. We haven't seen that. And now it looks as though hopes have been dashed for a negotiated ceasefire in the Gaza Strip that would free those remaining hostages, which means that the civilian population inside Gaza City, which is now very much in the crosshairs, is going to have to expect some severe punishment. Now, according to people that I've been speaking to who have been briefed on this issue in the Israeli government, they say that this is going to be a very gradual move by the IDF into Gaza City.
And then you have the hostages that are still
That's
inside
right.
Gaza. And I mentioned as I came to you, the families that were camped out outside of Netanyahu's home in Jerusalem, family members that are very worried about the safe return of their hostages. What is the explanation from the Israeli government on them? How do they plan on getting those that are still alive back?
Well, the Israeli government has been maintaining a pretty consistent line on this issue. They say, despite the evidence, despite the glaring fact that the vast majority of the hostages that have been released so far have been released under negotiated ceasefires, the Israelis, and Benjamin Netanyahu top down, say that the only reason why those negotiated ceasefires have worked, to the extent that those hostages have been freed, is because of military pressure. And I actually spoke just a couple of minutes ago with a young man whose brother is continued there, who's still in captivity. He was saying that he was having trouble sorting this out. He doesn't know what to think. He's been protesting, demanding an end to the war and the release of all the remaining hostages. But he also is sticking to Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government's line that this is a crisis that needs military pressure. So Israeli society is very much divided on this.
How do Israelis feel right now about their prime minister?
Well, there is always a lot of anger, and this predates the October 7th attacks. There were protests in the streets that were rolling for months and months over Netanyahu's what they called judicial reforms. In terms of opinion polls that we've been hearing, there's a lot of support for this current operation. But there is still a lot of anger at how the war has been continued and how it looks as though, to many Israelis, that the goalposts for some sort of ceasefire, negotiated end to the fighting, how they keep shifting, and that it's Netanyahu who's the one who's shifting them and doing it for cynical purposes in order to cling to power. I wouldn't necessarily say it's directed in one particular direction in a unifying way that could change government or change policies. Remember, these protests have been going on a more than weekly basis for nearly 2 years, and yet the war persists.
Is there a sense inside Israel that if they were to hand over all the hostages, that he would, in fact, end this war?
That would be one of the contingencies. That would be one of the requirements, that the war would have to end if the hostages were to be released. That is a deal that has been on the table for quite some time. Whether or not Israelis believe that Netanyahu would honor that, I don't think any Israeli wants to see Hamas staying in power. But they don't want to do it at the expense of the lives of those last remaining 20 hostages. And the polling shows this out. The people that I've spoken to anecdotally, they bear this out, that they want to see Hamas destroyed. But they also want to see the hostages freed, and they want that first and foremost. And if that means that the other goal of totally destroying Hamas is put secondary, well, then so be it.
Matt Bradley, thank you.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.